incredible because it's an incredible honour to be here and to speak to you, and it's a great opportunity for me to talk about Troy Davis. And I'm always interested in what people do aside from what you know them for doing. So I hope that I'm not going to bore you to tears with what I do, aside from what you might know I do. So I also wanted to say happy birthday to Amnesty International. It's 50 years since Amnesty was founded, and I think it's 50 years of them working for us, for all of us, and that is something that they are celebrating and that we should celebrate. So I just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to thank the geography professor at Mansfield College for rejecting me when I applied in 1994, I think it was, because I ended up going to University College London with my friend Tim, who plays the piano in the band that I'm in, and we didn't go to Oxford, but we did make a lot of music while we were there, and without being rejected, I guess I wouldn't have had that chance. So, okay, so can you hear me at the back? Okay, good. So who am I? Well, I play the drums in Keane. According to Wikipedia, I'm the fourth most interesting Richard Hughes. After an Irish jockey, an Australian journalist, a British writer who's dead. So I think I'm the most important living English guy called Richard Hughes on Wikipedia. I was born in 1975. I started playing the drums when I was a teenager in a band called the Lotus Eaters, which became Cherry Keane, which became Keane, and that's what I do now. Back to Wikipedia. Apparently much of our third album, especially the song You Don't See Me, was written by Tim about my unrequited love for a music journalist who married another man and broke my heart. This is total rubbish, but I wanted to share it with you because it was so brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the death penalty, and I'm going to talk about Amnesty International and the work that I have tried to do with them. In 2009, I went to Georgia in the United States to visit Troy Davis, who, as he said, was executed on the 21st of September this year. And then if we've got time, I'm sure we will, I'll take any questions that you have afterwards. Amnesty International opposes the death penalty in all cases. And so do I. My belief is that it is wrong to kill people. There are some people that I think should be locked up and should die in jail, but I don't think we should kill them. There's a bumper sticker that, America's so good for bumper stickers. There's one that says, why do we kill people who kill people to show people that killing people is wrong? I think when the death penalty is finally finished, it will seem as archaic and medieval as the rack and thumbscrews. And I think it will be gone one day. I want to start with a few statistics. It might be a little bit dry, but currently there are approximately 17,800 people on death row somewhere in the world. 3,251 of them are in America, but 139 nations do not use the death penalty, and that's pretty amazing. Out of around 190 nations on the planet, 139 do not use the death penalty. Last year, there were 23 nations that did execute people. Top of the list is China. It's estimated in thousands, but the total is unknown because they don't release statistics. Iran is second with 252 or more. North Korea third with 60 or more. Yemen fourth with 53 or more. The USA is fifth with 46. And Saudi Arabia sixth with 27 or more people. In America, 34 states use the death penalty, 16 do not. You can also be executed for federal crimes, such as carrying things across borders that becomes a non-state issue. Washington, D.C. doesn't have the death penalty. Use of the death penalty was briefly halted between 1972 and 1976. Since then, 1,273 people have been executed in the States, 1,261 of them men and 12 women. This included 22 juveniles, although that practice has been stopped since 2005. It peaked in 1999 with 98 executions, dropping to 46 last year. Amongst the different states, by far and away the most executions are done in Texas with 475. Virginia is second with 109, Oklahoma third with 96, Florida fourth with 70, Missouri fifth with 68, Alabama sixth with 55, and Georgia, where I went, is seventh with 52 last year. And 52 in total, and included 4 so far this year. The majority of people are executed with lethal injection, that's 1,098, 157 electrocuted, 11 in the gas chamber, 3 have been executed by hanging, and 3 by firing squad. Besides the moral objections to the death penalty, there are many other arguments against it. Firstly, that it's not a deterrent. The murder rates are highest in the South, which is where execution rates are highest. In 2009, there was a study by Radlett and Laycock, which said that 88% of former presidents of the nation's top academic criminological societies rejected the notion that the death penalty deters murder. It's also a racist policy. That 43% of people executed are people of colour, from under 20% of the population. And 55% of the people on death row are people of colour. Nationally, 50% of murder victims are white, but in death penalty cases, it's 75%. So you're more likely to be put on death row if you execute a white person than if you execute a black person. The American Civil Liberties Union called this blatant prejudice in our application of the death penalty. It costs an awful lot. The LA Times estimates it costs over $250 million per execution in California, or that annually they spend over $114 million a year more executing people than if they just kept them in prison for life. California is currently cutting welfare and firing teachers. There's an amazing New Yorker article that if you ever have time, and with partying and the dinners here and your work and coming to things like this, I don't know how you have time to fit those in, but if you have time, I urge you to read a New Yorker article about a guy called Cameron Todd Willingham, who was executed for arson in 2005 in Texas. Except he didn't do it. He was executed because an arson specialist said it was arson. Unfortunately, after he was executed, another arson specialist came along and said, there's no way this was arson. But of course he'd been executed, so he couldn't be released. To date, 138 people have been exonerated from death row, so found guilty of something and sentenced to death and released afterwards. Only 17 of those people have been released because of DNA evidence. The latest, Anthony Graves, the judge said the state had suppressed statements from their key witness that Graves had not been involved in a murder, and yet he'd been imprisoned and put on death row. The Innocence Project, which investigates all kinds of crimes where there may be DNA evidence that proves innocence, has done a lot of research into why people are convicted of crimes and then eventually found innocent. 17 of those on death row. They found that out of 275 exonerations, 168 were African Americans, 81 Caucasians, 20 Latinos, 2 Asian American, and 2 that they didn't have the race for. And in these cases, the leading cause of wrongful convictions was eyewitness misidentification. This was a fact in 75% of post-conviction DNA exonerations, the leading cause. Politically, the President rarely comments because it's normally a state matter. President Obama in his memoir said he thinks it does little to deter crime, but he supports capital punishment in cases that are, quote, so heinous, so beyond the pale, that the community is justified in expressing the full measure of its outrage by meting out the ultimate punishment. Sadly, community outrage doesn't tend to be a very good measure of whether somebody is guilty or not. Fortunately, President Obama's home state, Illinois, just took the death penalty off its books. Vice President Joe Biden in 1995 said, "The death sentence is like no other. There's no turning back once it has been carried out. To state the obvious, a mistake cannot be fixed. Mistakes do happen. Innocent people are convicted and sentenced to die." Okay, so why do I care? What does it mean to me? Well, while we were in Georgia, I was there with Amnesty International, Amnesty USA, Amnesty UK, and a member of Parliament, Alistair Carmichael MP. And he was chair at the time of the all-party anti-death penalty group, a group of over 100 MPs campaigning for the rights, for example, for British people who are on death row around the world, and also globally to stop executions. He quoted Martin Luther King that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Okay. So I'm just going to let these guys have a seat. All right, so as a member of a band, I've been very lucky. I've toured America around 15 times. I've actually lost count of how many American tours we've done. And I absolutely love being in America. I'm just back with my wife from New York City. We were there just on holiday. I go there so much, but I like to go there on holiday too. There's so much heart, there's so much spirit, and there's so much optimism in the people in America. It just seems so out of place that they would still use the death penalty. I mean, can you imagine on the news in this country hearing a newsreader say that this morning in Manchester a man was executed for a murder he committed 20 years ago? When you don't have the death penalty, it's very strange when you hear about it being used. And I think it's important for countries that don't have the death penalty to share that experience with countries that do, to show that there is an alternative. Also, talking to people that work with Amnesty International, when they go to China, or they go to Yemen, or they go to Saudi Arabia and say, you've got to stop executing people, or they go to Iran and say, you've got to stop stoning people, those countries can say, well, America does it, so can it be that bad? I mean, they don't stone people to death, but they still kill their own citizens. So how did I hear about Troy Davis? It's difficult to get the news when you're on the road, and I listened to a podcast called Democracy Now!, and his sister was being interviewed there in September 2008. An execution date was looming, his second execution date. I should tell you a little bit about Troy's case. He was born in 1968. He went through high school, he graduated. On the night of the 19th of August 1989, he was in the same place where Mark Allen MacPhail, an off-duty police officer, was murdered. He was convicted on the 28th of August 1991 and sentenced to death. If you want to hear the full details, Amnesty's website has a report called Unconscionable and Unconstitutional, which is pretty big and I would urge you to read that. I'm not going to go through all the details of the case. The basics were that Officer MacPhail was an off-duty police officer, and he ran to the aid of a man who was being attacked. The man who was doing the attacking had a gun, pulled a gun, and shot him dead. Officer MacPhail was a hero. He left a wife and 2 children, and he should be the person that is being talked about. But he's not, because there's so much doubt around the guilt of Troy Davis that people are talking about Troy Davis. But it's important to remember that there are 2 victims that we're talking about: Officer MacPhail and his family, and Troy Davis. The next day, a man called Sylvester Red Coles went to the police with his lawyer and said that he was there and that Troy Davis had killed Officer MacPhail. The police went to Troy's house, took a photo of him, put up posters, and eventually his photo was put on the front page of one of the Savannah newspapers the following day with the headline, "Cop Killer." Troy had feared for his life, but he voluntarily surrendered to the police. The jury, only one member of the jury said that he hadn't heard about the case before the trial, but the court denied his lawyer's plea to move the trial to somewhere where the jury wouldn't know about the case. Troy's conviction was based on eyewitness testimony earlier. That's why I was talking about the Innocence Project. Eyewitness testimony has been shown time and again to be unreliable. Confessions that Troy had alleged to have made turned out not to be true. The jailhouse snitch who said, "Troy confessed to me," turned around eventually and said, "He never did that, I made it up." No weapon was ever found, despite the fact that Sylvester Coles owned a gun of the same caliber that the policeman was shot with, and he was never ordered to produce it. There was no physical evidence that linked Troy to the murder. He was there, but he says as soon as a gun appeared, he was running away. Seven out of the 9 non-police witnesses have recanted their statements, have recanted their evidence that Troy was the man that committed murder. The witnesses go further, some of them implicating Sylvester Coles. But the evidence about Sylvester Coles was never heard, even at the most recent hearings, because the judge rejected them because Coles himself wasn't there to defend himself. It seems that the police were given their man by Sylvester Coles and they made it fit. There are plenty of examples of the recanted testimony in this document, which I would urge you to read. Okay. My activism. What have I done with Amnesty? Well, like all people here, are there any people here who are part of the Oxford University Amnesty group? Okay, that's fantastic to see. Well done. Like most people's activism, it starts small. I heard Martina on the radio, Troy's sister, talking about Troy. She was urging people to make phone calls to the parole board, to the senators and congressmen of Georgia, to the Georgia governor, Sonny Perdue. So I started making some calls. They seemed really interested in the fact that someone in England had heard about Troy's case. We happened to be performing on Jules Holland on TV a few weeks afterwards, and I wore a t-shirt that said "Justice for Troy Davis." And I started talking about Troy in interviews. And it was at that point that Amnesty got in touch and said, "Would you like to go and visit Troy? We're sending some people. Would you like to go with them?" So in September 2009, I went to see him. We started off in Washington, D.C. As I said, I was with a member of Parliament, so we met a couple of congressmen, including John Lewis, civil rights icon, a man who marched with Martin Luther King. I let Alistair Carmichael MP do most of the talking in those meetings. I didn't really have anything more serious to add than a member of Parliament representing 100 members of Parliament was going to say. But then we went down to Atlanta, we met Amnesty staff, we met lots of the local activists, some state politicians. I did an interview with a local music magazine before we went down to Savannah, where Troy was from. Met with church leaders and black civil rights leaders. we got on TV because there were some crazy Brits that were over there talking about a guy on death row that we probably shouldn't have ever heard of. And it happened that the guy who edited the TV news was a big Keane fan. We spoke at Savannah State University, and we even appeared on the university TV channel. And then we went to death row. I didn't think too much about it when I was asked. I just said, yes, of course, I'd love to go. But then I started getting criminal records forms to fill in and prison visit forms. The prison visit form, you had to say what your relationship was to the person that you were visiting. And they told me to write down that I was his friend, even though I'd never met him. But I guess that's what we were doing, what friends do, and standing up for people. I didn't know what Troy would be like. I'd seen a grainy photo of him and heard a crackly voice on a phone interview. But that weekend, we took Interstate 75 to exit 201, just like a random, normal motorway exit, parked up at a gas station, got a load of change because you were allowed to take change in for vending machines inside the prison. And there it was, these brick gates which said Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison. It doesn't say death row, it doesn't say we kill people here. It's in scientific terminology. It's a diagnostic and classification prison. I mean, I have no idea what that means. It doesn't mean death row, but that's what it actually is. You drive down this long driveway past Corrections Lake, whatever Corrections Lake is, where the warden goes fishing. You go around a corner, and suddenly you're faced with this fence that's ridiculously high and has more razor wire than you can imagine at the top of it, and these whitewashed walls that have no windows in them. It was incredibly hot. Georgia in September is still very warm and very humid. And it was like a movie. As we pulled up into the parking lot, this guy was released from jail. He was wearing these fresh khaki trousers with the straightest line down the middle of them you'll ever see, and a fresh white shirt. And he was there in the arms of his girlfriend or his wife. She was leading him to their car, and he was getting away. He'd done his time in jail, and he was being released. We were met at the gate by Officer Barabbas. If you know your Bible, there is some irony being met at death row by somebody called Barabbas. You have to go through x-rays. It's like being in an airport, but more so. You have to leave everything in the car except your coins. You literally have to turn your pockets out. I walk through with my pockets out like that. They check your paperwork, and then above the gates it says, "Make a difference." We went through this long corridor, through these, I guess you only see them in films like Terminator, these gates where you go sort of into an airlock, and then somebody who's behind bulletproof glass shuts the gate behind you, and then the gate in front of you is opened, and then you go through into the prison. For some reason, the air conditioning wasn't working in the prison that day, and we were led into this cell through the regular visiting area where, again, like a film, there was a man cradling his baby, because that's the only time he ever got to see his child, because he was in prison and his wife had brought his child. This room was a whitewashed room. It had a couple of tables and some chairs. It was about 2 meters by about 5 meters. And it turns out it was the holding cell where people are kept before they are executed. Troy had been kept there the day that I first heard about the case, the day I was making phone calls. Troy had been in that room, and he got to within 2 hours of being executed that night. There was a huge iron gate with a slot in it for a tray to pass people their meals. And eventually Troy was wheeled out. He'd hurt his ankle playing basketball, so he was on crutches and he was being wheeled around. He said, as Alistair Carmichael went up to him, he was very British and held out his hand, and Troy just said, "I don't do handshakes, I do hugs." Big hugs, it turns out. He's a big guy with a very soft voice and a huge smile. And despite having been in prison for 2 decades, he had no anger that I could see at all. He answered any question that the Amnesty people put to him, all the while we were with his mother and his sister who were there as well. And they were having a conversation like it was just a regular Sunday lunch. We'd gone out to the vending machines and we got Troy his favourite food, which was chicken nuggets with barbecue sauce. And we were asking him all these questions, and his mother was just nagging him, saying, "Your food's getting cold." I was asking him about his daily life. He had a cell not much bigger than the room we were in, with a thin mattress on a metal bed that was cemented right into the wall. He put his shirt underneath his mattress every night to keep it pressed so he looked smart. And you could just about see Davis written in pen on the pocket that had faded from years of being washed. His daily routine is either 3 hours or 6 hours of exercise. The rest of the day he would be in his cell. There's no hot water, which is fine in the summer, but it's very cold in the winter there. So they would have to shower in cold water. There was a TV that was outside the cells, and the prisoners were allowed to sort of swap who had the remote on a daily basis, so they each got to watch their favourite shows. But I started to learn that the prisoners, they never get to see beyond the walls of the prison. There are no outside windows and the walls are very high, so their eyesight starts to deteriorate. If you can't see beyond that wall for 20 years, your eyesight is going to start deteriorating. So all the prisoners wear glasses. And their ankles and their knees start to give way because they only ever walk on concrete. He was telling me that nature is precious. If a bird ever flies in through an open window, they all put their sheets up against the windows to stop it from escaping, just so they can be in the presence of something else, some nature for a while. He said if grass grows in the cracks between slabs in their exercise area, people will pick those blades of grass and cherish them just to feel something that's not concrete or metal. In 2008, he was visited by the Reverend Al Sharpton, and the prison warden let them go out into the garden, the prison garden. He never even knew it was there. Suddenly, he was out in this place on a concrete path with grass either side, and he asked the guards if he could walk on the grass. He took his shoes off, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt the feeling of walking on grass under his feet instead of concrete. And he described that to me as feeling like the Shawshank Redemption. Now, the idea of a guy who's in prison watching a film about guys in prison being released from prison just basically broke my heart. We were lucky enough to have a photo taken. The prison photographer was on duty. He paid $1.50 for a voucher that day, and we got a cracked photo because it dried so fast in the heat of us together with Troy. He was telling us he's allowed at most 7 books or magazines a week, and he had to ration his reading so he didn't finish them all on the first day. He was only allowed a certain number of stamps, so he couldn't reply to all the letters. But Amnesty ran a campaign to send him birthday cards a couple of years ago, and he had so much post that he had to go to the mailroom because it was too much hard work to bring the post to him on a daily basis. He's been described by the warden as a model prisoner because he worked on his case and he was never violent towards anyone. He only ever got in trouble twice, both times for cursing, in 20 years being in prison for something that he said he didn't do. Troy as a guy was completely amazing. His family visited him every weekend for 15 years. They only reduced that because he told them not to come every weekend because he was worried about the effect it was having on his nephew, Dejan. He was just Uncle Troy to this lad. He gave good advice. He told him to be good and to work hard at his school. He had a very strong Christian faith and an amazing family that supported him. And I think that's why he was still a positive guy. His only frustration was that those who admit their guilt find it easier to get clemency on death row than people who protest they are innocent. I've had a lot of chances to talk about Troy. This is one of the most amazing chances I've ever had. I'm very grateful to my bandmates for their support, allowing me to use our website and our Facebook page. to promote Troy's case, to get people to sign petitions on his behalf. Amnesty managed to get 800,000 signatures, including 50,000 from the UK, delivered to the Georgia Parole Board this year. Despite all this, plus the European Union objecting to his execution, the Pope, former President Jimmy Carter, the former Deputy Director of the FBI, William Sessions, George W. Bush's Attorney General, and many, many other people, he was executed earlier this year. And his last words were to say that he was innocent, but also that God should bless his executioners. Okay, the future. I want there to be a legacy for Troy Davis. I don't want him to be just another in a line of people that get executed. You're students, you're busy, you have a lot of hard work to do. But I urge you to get involved in whatever cause it is that you feel the most passionate about, whether it's animal rights, gender equality, child poverty, whatever it is, if it's the death penalty. Get involved, because you don't know what it's going to end up with. I started off by making a few phone calls because I heard about something on a podcast, and now I'm talking about it to you guys at the Oxford Union. And that is pretty amazing for me. And you could do the same thing. If you go to ouai.co.uk, you can see what Amnesty are doing at Oxford University. They're a very active group, by all accounts. They meet at 9 p.m. on Tuesdays at the Ox Hub building on Turl Street. Is that right? And this term's focus is women's rights in Afghanistan, abolishing the death penalty in the US, Iran and Belarus, and the arms trade. The legacy of Troy for me, I think I'm going to try and do something around the death penalty in Belarus. It's the only country in Europe or the former Soviet states that still executes people, and it does so particularly brutally by taking them without warning and shooting them in the back of the head within minutes of taking them. Their families don't even get told till after it has happened. Troy's sister said that it was activism that kept Troy alive through his first 3 execution dates. He was only executed the 4th time they tried. That kept him alive for another few years, and it feels like it nearly got him out. But remember the statistic, there are 17,000 or more people on death row in the world right now. Are we just going to let them be executed? I'm pretty much finished, but I just wanted to say that the death penalty as a concept is abstract. But Troy was a real person. I was there in a room with him. He made me laugh. He made me smile. He was a humble man, a family man, a good uncle, a good brother, and a good son. And the state of Georgia killed him. And this has to stop. I understand Salil Shetty was going to be speaking tonight but can't make it, but I wanted to finish with something that he said. He said, "A world free of the death penalty is not only possible, it is inevitable. The question is, how long will it take?" Thank you very much.